Hi, Ray here. I'm Canadian, eh? And I interrupt my usual programming to discuss Bill C-11. Well, who or what, you may ask, is Bill C-11? Well, it's the Canadian government's online streaming act, and you should be asking about it. First of all, it's been cooked up by bureaucrats from a body called Canadian Heritage and the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission, the CRTC. Bill C-11 claims to be drafted in the interest of Canadian artists. As it relates here, if ratified, it could determine what content gets surfaced on YouTube, including on the homepage and Watch Next. Regulations could compel YouTube to promote some creators' content over that of others. I'm not kidding. And you thought that Canadians were helpful and guileless. Isn't there already enough suspicion of the mighty algorithms that choose content without some shadowy government edict manipulating what you get to see here? I don't know about you, but I'll take the Google over some CRTC wonk's idea of what you or I should be watching. To the point, I believe the algorithm, as it is, actually does, if somewhat crudely, recommend content that corresponds to users' interests. Though it doesn't recommend my content half enough. So I guess I just have to try harder to please my audience, you. And you and I must trust that YouTube have created an evolving algorithm that can sift through all the billions of hours of dross to bring us the content we indicate by our habits that we're interested in watching. So watch one police car chase video and see what happens. And look, you're here, so I guess it succeeded in this case. Give this video the old thumbs up to help it succeed even more. It's your democratic right. But really, I don't want to make light of this situation. I have some experience with Canada's bureaucracy. This is a system that presently can't issue passports expeditiously without people having to line up for days, and lost mine and my wife's marriage certificate twice during our pension application process, as well as my wife's citizenship document. In recent days, the Liberal Party has pushed this bill through Parliament, jamming in around 150 amendments without debate or a vote. It's now up to the Senate, a sort of rubber stamp committee, if this monstrosity becomes law. Let me be clear, as politicians are wont to say, I'm not opposed to promoting Canadian content. And the CRTC has, over the years, I believe, served a good purpose in giving Canadian content, CanCon, as it's referred to, a leg up in a very competitive space. A space, let's face it, on this continent dominated by our much larger and well-financed friends to the south. So in large part, I've been supportive of the CRTC's efforts to make sure CanCon isn't overshadowed, even when some of it should have never seen the light of day. But especially when it comes to online content, the people behind the Heritage Department and the CRTC are out of touch. Or more worryingly, they're in touch with the wrong people. Traditional broadcasting has very little in common with platforms like YouTube in particular, and many have tried, apparently without success, to make this point to the parliamentary committee in charge of deliberations. Canadian YouTuber J.J. McCullough, a guy from New Westminster where I went to high school, recently spoke to the committee. He told them, and I quote, "The tremendous success and even worldwide fame of many Canadian YouTubers in the absence of government regulation should invite questions about the necessity of Bill C-11. An unregulated YouTube has been a 17-year experiment, and the result has been an explosion of popular Canadian content produced by Canadians of every imaginable demographic." Speaking of demographics, I'm 70 years old. I've put countless hours and a sizable financial investment into building this channel and another before it. I've persevered through health challenges, injury, surgeries, a third cancer diagnosis and treatment, In fact, I started my first YouTube channel in 2009 as a sort of rehabilitation program, an important part of it anyway, after a severe life-altering injury. And it turned out to be a real lifesaver, literally helping maintain my sanity as I navigated a new life, stripped of the meaning that I'd invested in former active athletic pursuits. I've seen this channel through demonetization when YouTube introduced the minimum 1,000 subs and 4,000 hours watch time for monetization, following the so-called adpocalypse. Now, my own meddling government, if this bill is passed, may put an end to all my hard work. The fact is, over the last 2+ decades, I've built an online presence, from my first website in the 90s to social media and YouTube, that has supported my photography career, with no help from the government. I didn't ask for it, and I don't need it. I do my taxes, and I declare my YouTube earnings, small as they are. And I suspect that the Canadian government hasn't any interest in me beyond making sure I'm paying my tithes. Otherwise, I don't have the money and power to get the ear of government, like lobbyists do. The current CRTC commissioner, Ian Scott, it's been reported, goes for beers with Bell CEO Mirko Bibic, allegedly seen recently following a CRTC decision that didn't go Bell's way. Make what you want of that. Nothing wrong with a friendly beer, eh? What this legislation could mean here on YouTube is, say you weren't interested at all in cameras, video production, the kind of stuff I create on this channel. I have loyal friends, actually, who never watch my videos, despite my pestering. Now, already, YouTube algorithm typecasts me a little more than I'd like. So, for instance, aside from the fact that this is a topical subject lately, it's not usually something, politics, that would get promoted much by the algorithm on my channel. But should this bill ultimately achieve its goals, if you're Canadian, you might find my content recommended in your feed, whether you're interested in the topic or not. How does that help me or you if you don't give a fig about photography? You'd be less likely to like my video, comment, watch the video for any length of time. All actions that right now signal approval. So, of course, it doesn't help you or me. It just pisses us off. And, speaking for myself, makes me more antagonistic toward government, if that's possible. Is it my fault that the government has put all its eggs in one basket, extractive industry? And now I have to pay the price with this bungling attempt, if you're to believe the intent, to help the arts? Canadian content creators are going to find themselves subject to all kinds of rules, and the onus will be on us to prove, if we can, within the limits of the legislation, that we should be exempt. How will it work? It sounds like a red tape nightmare in the making, one that I don't care to experience. And maybe that's the real intent of this bill, to shut down the competition. Really, am I this little old broadcaster? Because that's what they have us all labeled for the purposes of this bill. Are we such a threat to the big guys? I guess collectively we are. Here's the thing. YouTube has allowed me, a Canadian for now, to reach an international audience. According to YouTube, over 90% of views of Canadian content as a whole come from outside Canada. And the metrics I see from my videos agree with that claim. My audience overwhelmingly resides in the US. My Canadian audience, love you guys, doesn't even come in second. It most often sits way below views from the UK and India. I mean, demographics, hard numbers. It's a no-brainer. And so, at the risk of sounding mercenary, the horror, the little money I make from YouTube, directly in terms of ad revenue, comes from the US. I mean, not just that American dollars flow to me in Canada from the partner program, but it's predominantly that US audience watching my videos that contain the ads that leads to my cut of the advertising revenue I pay taxes on in Canada. Forgive me if I suspect that's what all this is about. I've attracted and work with other international entrepreneurs, small to medium-sized companies in large part, who also rely on the global reach of this platform. What effect will this legislation have on those relationships? Will those companies still want to partner with me if the reach of my content is restricted or redirected primarily to Canada? So now I've actually gone and made the admission the government seems to want to use as a reason to target my content. At the least, this idea is just plain dumb. But worse, it may be willfully cunning. It was hatched by people who don't understand how this all works, or, as I say, people with an agenda that's not in the interest of independent content creators like me. It's no secret that big telecom is losing eyes and ears to online content. Ad revenues are suffering. I mean, all the traditional media have been losing out to online content for years because it sucks. I used to buy several newspapers. Hell, I wrote for newspapers. It wasn't so much that I could get free content online beginning in the 90s that I canceled subscriptions. It was because the content of those newspapers began less and less to represent my interests. Really, they began to represent views that I found abhorrent. And the bastards that ran them started refusing to run my op-eds. We can now choose freely, if we maintain our sense of discernment, but we can choose the content we're interested in. Now, there's a great danger in that as well. It's been widely discussed. The danger of ideological silos where extremism and dogmatism breed. But that's for another video, probably on another channel. And I doubt this legislation will address the problem. But I don't know about you, but government is the last arbiter I want telling me in any way, shape, or form what's good for me to ingest. I'd rather they stick to labeling foods and drugs. I can consider or ignore those recommendations at my own risk. But I'll be damned if they'll force feed me my news and entertainment. If any MPs are watching, maybe concentrate on rescuing our ailing medical system that politicians before you helped build. I think most Canadians would agree. Seriously, if I were younger or well off, I'd consider relocating to a country that didn't treat Orwell's warnings as a blueprint for governance. I know I'm not the only Canadian content creator entertaining the idea. Chris Howe has signaled his disgust in no uncertain terms. I'm a small fish amongst some pretty successful Canadian YouTubers, including Chris, Canadian superstar Peter McKinnon, of course, Renee Ritchie, Gerald Undone, JJ McCullough. I wonder what camera conspiracies host Casey Stern makes of all this. I hate to think. But maybe this is a plot to poison the airwaves. As I say, it's very, very likely to favor the status quo. Look, I distrust all big corporate entities. I once hid out in the mountains for a few years, convinced that the development of interconnected electronic communications concentrated in the wrong hands would come to threaten democracy and freedom. I developed that theory, if you will, nearly 50 years ago, long before the internet as we know it. Maybe I was reading too much dystopian literature, but here we are. And the internet is the most powerful form of communication, of entertainment, with the power to shape and control or withhold information in today's troubled world. I want to explain here, for non-Canadians, especially those who might have an alternative negative connotation for the word liberal, and so Canada's large L Liberal Party, who are behind Bill C-11. As with most political parties, what they call themselves usually has little to do with what they actually represent. From my point of view, which has most often embraced small l liberal values, the Canadian Liberal Party is a conservative corporate lobby. It was actually under the Liberal government, led by Prime Minister Jean Chrétien in the 90s, that the CRTC introduced something called the New Media Exemption Order. It recognized that a hands-off approach to regulating online content was leading to incredible creativity and success for Canadian creators. This bill's predecessor, Bill C-10, as I recall, preserved the exemption to a degree, but it died on the order table. Despite denials from Canadian Heritage Minister Pablo Rodriguez, it's clear that Bill C-11 intends to do away with that exemption. Under pressure from Conservative MP Rachel Thomas, Commissioner Scott has admitted that indeed individual users creating content, people like me, are captured by the bill. Captured. As is often the case internationally today, our struggle has little to do with traditional left-right divisions and more to do with entrenched power structures, which are served by governments right across those superficial traditional labels, without any discernible difference in their real loyalties. In my opinion, we've actually fallen for a sham hiding behind a curtain. We live in Oz. All the wizards work for wicked elites. Don't be evil is not part of their pledge. In theory, I believe strongly in the idea of democratically elected leaders legislating in the best interests of the people. And I think we definitely need a conversation on who controls information in our interconnected world. Information is power. But this CanCon power struggle isn't it. To paraphrase the Aesopian parable about elephants and mice from our present Prime Minister's father, Pierre Trudeau, it's just another battle of the giants that'll likely end up rolling over on the little guys. Strange to say that the mouse's old fear of getting squished has caused him to devise a suffocating trap like Bill C-11. Other commentators have likened this bill to an edict that doesn't outright ban books, but regulates the stores that can carry them. I'll leave this, my small contribution to this debate, that can, for the time being, potentially reach an international audience, even beyond the modest subscriber count of 3,500 I've attracted. And I'll end it with a cautionary quote that I often find relevant today. The final paragraph of Aldous Huxley's Brave New World Revisited, published in 1958. It was a follow-up essay to the famous futuristic novel he wrote in 1930. There is still some freedom left in the world, Huxley wrote. Many young people, it is true, do not seem to value freedom, but some of us still believe that without freedom, human beings cannot become fully human, and that freedom is therefore supremely valuable. Perhaps the forces that now menace freedom are too strong to be resisted for very long. It is still our duty to do whatever we can to resist them. I'll leave links in the description to advocates who are leading the resistance, if you feel compelled to let the Canadian government know what you think about this legislation. In the meantime, take care of yourselves. Cheers. And we'll see you later. I hope.